Hi, this is Andre, and thanks for checking out Synthisophy. Synthisophy is scientifically integrating the wisdoms of history, based on fact and truth, into our present culture. Let's take a look today at chapter 27, Yin and Yang. In Chinese philosophy, Yin and Yang, which in Chinese is one word, Yin Yang, and it literally means dark bright. It describes how seemingly opposite or contrary forces may actually be complementary, interconnected, and interdependent in the natural world, and how they may give rise to each other as they interrelate to one another. Many tangible dualities, such as light and dark, fire and water, expand, contract, black and white, left and right, are thought of as physical manifestations of the duality symbolized by yin and yang. Duality is found in many belief systems, but yin and yang are parts of a oneness that is also equated with the Tao. The term dualistic monism has been coined in an attempt to express this paradox of simultaneous unity-duality. Yin and yang can be thought of as complementary rather than opposing forces that interact to form a dynamic system in which the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, as in Gestalt. Everything has both yin and yang aspects. For instance, shadow cannot exist without light. The yin-yang symbol shows a balance between the two opposites, with a portion of the opposite element in the middle of each. Let's consider masculinity and femininity in terms of yin and yang. Masculinity, manhood or manliness, is a set of attributes, behaviors, and roles associated with boys and men. Traits traditionally viewed as masculine include courage, independence, assertiveness, avoidance of femininity, restricted emotions, pursuit of achievement and status, and self-reliance. Femininity, womanliness, or womanhood, is a set of attributes, behaviors, and roles generally associated with girls and women. Traits traditionally cited as feminine include gentleness, empathy, sensitivity, caring, compassion, tolerance, nurturance, and providing assistance and support in times of stress. Let's read a pertinent quote from Junger, mentioned earlier in chapter 14, from his book, Tribe on Homecoming and Belonging. Quote, "The most alarming rhetoric comes out of the dispute between liberals and conservatives. It's a dangerous waste of time because they're both right. The perennial conservative concern about high taxes supporting a non-working underclass has entirely legitimate roots in our evolutionary past and shouldn't be dismissed out of hand. Early hominids lived a precarious existence where freeloaders were a direct threat to survival, and so they developed an exceedingly acute sense of whether they were being taken advantage of by members of their own group. By the same token, one of the hallmarks of early human society was the emergence of a culture of compassion that cared for the ill, the elderly, the wounded, and the unlucky. In today's terms, that's a common liberal concern that also has to be taken into account. Those two driving forces have coexisted for hundreds of thousands of years in human society and have been duly codified in this country as a two-party political system. The eternal argument over liberal and conservative thought will never be resolved because each side represents an ancient and absolutely essential component of our evolutionary past." End quote. As Junger so succinctly implies, conservatives, and particularly the alt-right, are the masculine yin, and the liberals, particularly the alt-left, are the feminine yang. In the past 4 million years of Paleolithic human evolution, these two traits were working together in harmony and were invaluable to the survival of the species. Otherwise, our species could very well have gone extinct. Yin and Yang were selected and are a product of human evolution. But now Yin and Yang seem to be separated and working against each other, as we saw in the previous chapter in the upside down bell curve, showing the polarization of the left and the right. Recall the conclusion in chapter 20. We are now very far from our genetic roots. So let's talk about the degrees of change in society over the 4 million years from Australopithecus to the advent of civilization, which is the baseline just described in Tribe, as in the cognitive, confirmation, and argumentative biases in the tribal warrior ethos, which is the ancient evolutionarily selected and genetically selected mindset of the hunter-gatherer era that resulted in the success of the tribe and Homo sapiens to the extinction of others. Revolutions resulting in degrees of change from the Paleolithic tribal baseline are agriculture 10,000 years ago, which led to the advent of civilization 6,500 years ago, then science, a revolution in thinking in 1620, then the Industrial Revolution, 1760, and the exponential growth of the human world population since 1900, from 500 million to 7 billion, as we can see here in this spike in population growth. And then the Digital Revolution, 1980, and the Information Age now. So, let's look at degrees of change through each revolution. Starting with our tribal hunter-gatherer Paleolithic past to agriculture, which means going from a small, maybe 50 to 100 people, mobile and physically demanding group, to a larger, perhaps hundreds of thousands, more stationary, small city or town-like community. Let's say this is 30 degrees of change. Then there is agriculture to civilization, going from a small city, town, or town-like environment to a huge nation-state, complete with laws for expected behaviors, as in Mesopotamia and Hammurabi's Code. Let's call that another 30 degrees of change. Then we have the scientific way of thinking to analyze and understand the world. Scientific revolution. Let's call that 30 degrees of change. Next is the Industrial Revolution. Call that 30 degrees of change. After that, we have the exponential growth of the human world population since 1900, from 500 million to 7 billion. Call that another 30 degrees of change. And now we have the Digital Revolution and the Information Age. Call that another 30 degrees of change. All put together, these make up 180 degrees of change in 10,000 years from the evolutionarily and genetically selected and now neurologically hardwired tribal instinct that was necessary for survival of and resulted in Homo sapiens in the time from 4 million years ago to 10,000 years ago. So 10,000 years of modern society divided by 4 million years of tribal society equals 0.0025, or 1/4 of 1%. In the last 1/4 of 1% of its time in existence, humanity now lives in a society that is 180 degrees different from the one it evolutionarily created in the earlier 99.75% of its earlier human existence. Let's take a quick look again now at this graph. As a visual, picture this graph of the world population with the baseline extending 400 times its present length, which is about the length of a football field. That would be the 4 million years leading to the spike in population. So as we can see, starting 10,000 years ago, those Paleolithic evolutionary traits of humanity were subject to huge societal change and have moved 180 degrees into uncharted societal waters. How will our Paleolithic brains adapt to this new environment? Is our present societal polarization the result of our evolutionarily cognitive, confirmation, and argumentative neurological biases in the context of Yin and Yang? The answer could very well be yes. So what can we do? Perhaps follow thesis 1. Maybe, if we understand that we live in an extraordinarily complex world and become aware of our evolutionarily selected cognitive biases that resulted in our confirmation biases that led to the tribe and argumentative state of mind, which was then stoked by the warrior ethos that has created this political polarization, we can rein in these human traits that have evolved over millions of years. Perhaps we could take a step back, try and detach ourselves from this genetic predisposition, and try to be a bit more rational rather than emotional in our political positions and discussions. Seek truth rather than argument. Listen, and reduce the amount of polarization and vitriol present in our society. So let's try and get away from alt-left and alt-right polarization. Let's move towards the more rational center, integrating aspects of both yin and yang, so our society resembles more of the functional tribe from whence we genetically and evolutionarily